Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Identification and proof of legal status.
I'm Honorable Naomi Sarah, Colorado District Court Judge, 4th Judicial District. My identification is in my wallet.
Sure you are. Everyone says there's something. Documentation right now.
My judicial credentials and driver's license are in my wallet in the vehicle.
Ma'am, keep your hands where we can see them.
I'm complying.
The King Soopers on Boulder Highway was crowded when it happened. Thursday afternoon, 4:15 p.m., the kind of Colorado spring that delivered warmth through mountain-cooled air and sunlight bouncing off the Rockies in the distance like fire on stone. Naomi James had stopped for a quick grocery run after court adjourned early, still wearing her professional attire beneath a light cardigan, her briefcase in the car. Her 10-year-old daughter, Maya, was asking about her science project. Her 7-year-old son, Elijah, was already sneaking grapes from the bag. Just another Thursday errand before heading home to prepare for tomorrow's docket. Except 4 ICE agents were stepping out of 2 unmarked vehicles she hadn't noticed in the far corner of the lot. Their body cameras were already recording what would become the most expensive grocery trip in Colorado history. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let's continue. Agent Derek Hollis led the approach. His partner's agents Brennan, Torres and Webb fanned out in a tactical pattern like they were approaching a threat. Naomi saw them coming as she closed the trunk, registered the spacing, the deliberate movements, the way their hands stayed ready near their belts. 23 years on the bench, starting as a public defender before her appointment, had taught her to read body language, to identify danger before it announced itself. Federal agents, ice patches visible on their vests, moving toward her sedan like she'd already been convicted of something. She knew exactly where this was going before Hollis reached her rear bumper. Maya stood by the cart, mid-sentence about needing poster board for her presentation. She went quiet when she noticed the men approaching, her excitement draining into concern. Elijah pressed closer to his mother's side, the grape bag clutched in his small hands. Naomi kept loading groceries. Slow, deliberate movements. Visible hands. 2 decades of navigating hostile courtrooms, aggressive prosecutors, and contemptuous defendants had taught her that sudden reactions around armed officers ended in tragedy. Hollis's voice cut through the parking lot noise, flat, rehearsed, authoritative. Afternoon. Immigration and Customs Enforcement conducting a compliance sweep in this area. Need to see identification and proof of legal status. The words carried no nuance. Just procedure without consideration. Authority without accountability. Naomi straightened, keeping her hands where they could see them, a bag of pasta still in her grip. I'm a sitting district court judge. Honorable Naomi James, Colorado State Judiciary. My identification and judicial credentials are in my wallet inside the vehicle. She gestured slowly toward her briefcase on the passenger seat, making every movement clear and intentional. Hollis didn't budge, didn't let her move. Everyone says something. Got any documentation on you right now? Proving citizenship? The way he said it made his disbelief obvious. He didn't believe her. Couldn't conceive that the black woman in casual clothes loading groceries might actually be who she claimed. Naomi felt the familiar burn igniting in her chest. The quiet fury that came from being treated like this in a public parking lot with her children watching, wearing professional slacks and a cardigan, carrying a briefcase with the Colorado state seal embossed on it, dismissed because 3 words, black, woman, casual, overrode everything else in their assessment. My driver's license is in my wallet. My judicial credentials are with it. I've been on the bench for 8 years, a practicing attorney for 15 years before that. If you contact the Colorado Judiciary, they'll verify everything immediately. Hollis's response came cold, sharp, final. We'll verify once we've established identity and status. Step away from the vehicle. Maya's hand found her mother's. Mama, what's happening? Naomi kept her eyes on Hollis, her voice steady and low. It's okay, sweetheart. Stay right beside me. But it wasn't okay. Agent Brennan moved to the driver's side, peering through the windows like he expected to find contraband. Torres positioned himself near the cart, blocking any path toward the store entrance. Webb stayed back, cutting off movement toward the street. The 2 SUVs had boxed her in from behind. She was trapped. Naomi reached slowly for her briefcase on the passenger seat. Stop. Don't reach for anything. Step away from the vehicle now. Hollis's hand moved to his belt. I'm retrieving my identification. You asked for documentation. It's in my briefcase and wallet. Step away from the vehicle. Now. The command hung heavy in the spring air. Around them, the parking lot maintained its Thursday rhythm. Shoppers loading minivans, employees collecting carts, the smell of bakery bread wafting through automatic doors. But people were starting to notice. A young man with his phone out 2 aisles over, an older woman near the entrance stopping to stare. Naomi stepped back from the car, hands raised where Hollis could see them. I'm complying. I'm Honorable Naomi James, Colorado District Court Judge, 4th Judicial District. Judicial Identification Number J4392. I'm unarmed. My children are with me. There is no reasonable suspicion, no probable cause for this stop. She said it loud enough for the body cameras, for the phones now recording from nearby shoppers, for anyone paying attention. Hollis grabbed her wrist the moment she cleared the car door, twisting her arm behind her back with practiced force. Brennan moved in from the other side. The handcuffs were cold against her skin, the metal biting into her wrists as they clicked shut with terrible finality. Mama, Elijah's voice cracked, high and terrified. Maya started crying, the grape bag dropping to the asphalt, purple fruit rolling away. It's okay, babies, stay right there, don't move. Naomi kept her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. This is an unlawful seizure. I'm not resisting. I'm a Colorado District Court judge. This is being recorded. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. There is no reasonable suspicion. I'm a United States citizen. I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hollis wasn't listening. He was already walking her toward the nearest SUV, Brennan holding her other arm. Torres stayed positioned by the children, his presence keeping them from following. Webb opened the vehicle's back door. The bystanders were fully engaged now. Multiple phones out, recording from different angles. A store manager rushed toward Maya and Elijah. Someone shouted something Naomi couldn't make out over the roar of blood in her ears. A cart clattered across the lot, abandoned. Naomi cataloged it all. The time, 4:23 p.m., the lack of Miranda warnings. The absence of any articulated reasonable suspicion. The dismissal of her judicial credentials without even attempting verification. Hollis's badge number visible on his vest, 6847, Brennan's, 7103. Torres, 6529. Webb, 7441. The body camera's red lights blinking. The growing crowd of witnesses. Her children's tears. Her daughter's terrified face. Her mind sharpened by 23 years of building cases from fragments and contradictions, of presiding over trials where evidence mattered was already constructing the framework. Fourth Amendment violation. Unlawful seizure without probable cause. Racial profiling. Infliction of emotional distress. Denial of due process. Each moment another piece of evidence in a case she would build from memory and methodical legal precision. The SUV door opened. Hollis guided her head down as they loaded her into the back seat. Through the window, Naomi could see the store manager kneeling beside Maya and Elijah, trying to comfort them. Could see her daughter's face, tear-streaked and confused. Could see her son reaching toward the SUV, calling for her. The door slammed shut. The vehicle pulled out of the lot, leaving her children with strangers, leaving her groceries scattered across the pavement, leaving her sedan parked with the trunk still open and her briefcase visible on the passenger seat, briefcase that contained not just her identification but court documents she'd been reviewing, documents with her name and title on every page. Inside the SUV, Hollis and Brennan spoke in low tones from the front seats. Casual. Bureaucratic. The radio crackled with dispatch codes. The GPS display showed the route to the processing facility 42 minutes southeast. Naomi sat in silence, wrists aching from the cuffs, and listened. That's 5 this week from the Boulder corridor. Should put us well over target for the month. The voice belonged to Brennan, carrying easily to the back seat. Hollis grunted acknowledgement. Regional office is really pushing the affluent minority areas now. They blend in better, so numbers look more legitimate. Professional types are easier to justify in reports. The words hit like hammer blows. Naomi kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, but her mind sharpened to a lethal edge. Target numbers, pushing affluent minority areas. Professional types easier to justify. They weren't just profiling. They were strategically targeting successful minorities to pad statistics while making it look legitimate, and they were discussing it openly, casually, like she wasn't sitting 3 feet behind them, or perhaps because they assumed a detained woman wouldn't matter, wouldn't be able to use what she'd heard. They'd just handed a sitting judge evidence of systematic corruption. Naomi closed her eyes and committed every word to memory. Every phrase, every inflection, the exact casual tone that revealed how normalized this had become. This wasn't just her case anymore. This was institutional, strategic, a pattern of corruption that went far beyond 4 agents in a parking lot. The facility appeared after 39 minutes. A low concrete structure surrounded by chain link and razor wire. Institutional gray under a sky that had clouded over, the mountain warmth gone, replaced by the smell of diesel and concrete. They processed her in a sterile room that reeked of disinfectant and fear. Still handcuffed. Still denied verification of her identity. A different agent name tag reading Kowalski took her fingerprints with bureaucratic indifference, barely looking at her face. Naomi answered their questions with measured precision. Name, date of birth, address. She requested her attorney. Requested a phone call. Requested immediate verification of her judicial appointment through the Colorado State Judiciary. Each request met with the same flat response. In process. All in due time. Standard procedure. She asked pointed questions in return, legal challenges wrapped in the calm tone she used from the bench. Under what authority am I being detained? What reasonable suspicion justified this seizure? Why wasn't my judicial identification verified on scene? Do you have a warrant? Have I been charged with anything? Are you aware of the penalties for unlawfully detaining a sitting judge? The agents shifted uncomfortably. Exchanged glances. Kowalski left the room twice, returning both times with the same non-committal responses. They were stalling, checking her story. Realizing, perhaps, that they'd detained not just someone with credentials, but someone with the power to destroy them from the bench. Naomi held back the overheard conversation about targets and professional minorities. That was her nuclear option. They'd learn about it in court. They moved her to a holding cell. 8 by 10 feet. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. Metal bench bolted to the wall. The handcuffs finally came off, leaving deep red marks on her wrists that would photograph well for evidence. The door locked with a heavy click. Through the small window, Naomi could see agents moving in the hallway, paperwork being shuffled with increasing urgency. The clock on the wall visible through the door's reinforced glass read 5:47 p.m. 2 hours and 9 minutes since Hollis had grabbed her wrist in that parking lot. Her children were still with strangers. Her elderly mother in Minneapolis was probably receiving frantic calls by now. Her court clerk would have noticed her absence. Judge James never missed scheduled conferences, never failed to communicate delays. And she was locked in a cell, her judicial authority dismissed, her constitutional rights violated, her family traumatized. All because 4 federal agents saw a black woman in casual clothes and couldn't imagine she might preside over the very kind of courtroom where their actions would be judged. Naomi sat on the metal bench, her back straight, her mind racing through case law and precedents and jurisdictional procedures. She thought of her journey growing up in a working-class Minneapolis neighborhood, the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination she'd faced in law school, the battles she'd fought as a public defender, the near-impossible path to the bench as a black woman. She thought of the cases she'd presided over, the defendants she'd judged fairly, the attorneys she'd held accountable, the system she'd sworn to uphold. She thought of Maya's terrified voice. Elijah's tears. The way her children had reached for her as the SUV pulled away. The fluorescent lights hummed. The clock ticked forward. 6 p.m. then 6:30. Then 7 p.m. Naomi James, Colorado District Court Judge. Unlawfully detained mother, witness to systematic corruption. Sat in that cell and began constructing her case with the same methodical precision she brought to every ruling from the bench. 5 hours and 17 minutes. That was how long Naomi spent in that holding cell before they finally verified her identity and released her without apology, without explanation, without even a pretense of acknowledging their catastrophic error. 5 hours and 17 minutes of fluorescent lights and disinfectant smell and the steady tick of the hallway clock. 5 hours and 17 minutes while her children waited with strangers, while her mother made frantic calls from Minneapolis, while bystander videos went viral on local news feeds and social media with hashtags like Judge James and IC Overreach. When Kowalski finally opened the cell door at 9:34 p.m., his expression was carefully blank, professionally neutral in the way that revealed everything. The judge was free to go. Identity confirmed. No apology. No explanation. Just bureaucratic acknowledgement wrapped in language designed to deflect accountability, as if detaining a sitting judge for over 5 hours was merely a procedural inconvenience requiring no further discussion. Naomi stood, smoothing her cardigan with deliberate calm. The red marks on her wrists were visible, already darkening to bruises that would photograph well for evidence. She kept her voice level, judicial, the same tone she used when addressing contemptuous attorneys in her courtroom. She wanted copies of all body camera footage from the incident. She wanted the names and badge numbers of every agent involved, which she had already documented herself. She wanted complete documentation of the reasonable suspicion that had justified her detention. She wanted the incident report number and the name of the supervising officer. Kowalski's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his eye. The judge could file a formal request through proper channels. Naomi held his gaze, unblinking. She was filing now, verbally, on record. She was also notifying him that she would be filing a formal complaint with the Office of Professional Responsibility, the DHS Inspector General, and the federal judiciary. This incident would be investigated at the highest levels. The color drained from Kowalski's face. They knew. They all knew now. They hadn't just detained a random woman they could intimidate into silence with bureaucratic procedure and veiled threats. They'd detained someone who could trigger investigations that would reach Washington, D.C. Someone whose single phone call could set machinery in motion that no agent could stop. Naomi collected her belongings from the property desk. Wallet with her judicial credentials still tucked inside where they'd been all along. Phone with 37 missed calls. Keys. Everything returned in a sealed plastic bag as if she'd been processed through some legitimate procedure rather than kidnapped by federal agents in a grocery store parking lot. Her court clerk, Jennifer, was waiting outside in the darkness. The young woman's face crumpled with relief when Naomi emerged into the cold night air. The drive back was silent. Jennifer knew better than to ask questions, knew her judge well enough to recognize when words would only interfere with the processing happening behind those calm, controlled eyes. They drove to Patricia's house in Boulder, where the children had been taken. The reunion shattered the composed facade Naomi had maintained through 5 hours of detention. Maya and Elijah ran to her the moment she walked through the door, their small bodies colliding with hers, arms wrapping desperately around her waist with a force that nearly knocked her backward. The word repeated like a prayer, like proof that she was real and back and safe. Mama, mama, mama. Naomi dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor and held them, felt their tears soak into her cardigan, felt her own tears come hot and relentless for the first time since Hollis had grabbed her wrist in that parking lot. Her hands shook as she stroked their hair, as she whispered reassurances that felt like lies because nothing was okay, nothing would be okay for a long time. She was here. She was right here. She was so sorry. Patricia stood in the doorway with her own tears falling silent, this retired teacher who'd known the family for years, who'd spent 5 hours comforting traumatized children while their mother sat in a cell for the crime of existing while black in a grocery store parking lot. Later, when the children finally released their grip and went to wash their tear-stained faces, Patricia pulled Naomi into the kitchen. Her voice was quiet but edged with steel. They had handcuffed her. In front of her babies. A sitting judge. Naomi nodded, unable to speak past the rage and grief lodged in her throat like broken glass. Patricia's next question was simple, direct. What would she do? Naomi's voice came out steady, cold, judicial. The same voice she used when pronouncing sentences, when holding attorneys in contempt, when exercising the full weight of her authority from the bench. What she was trained to do. She was going to dismantle them piece by piece. That night, after the children finally fell asleep, Maya in her bed, Elijah curled against her side, both refusing to let her out of sight. Naomi sat at Patricia's dining table and began her documentation. Timestamps, badge numbers, exact quotes from the parking lot confrontation, the tactical formation the agents had used, the dismissal of her judicial credentials, the handcuffs applied without cause, Maya's terrified voice, Elijah's tears, the bystander videos she'd already located on social media, downloaded, backed up in 3 separate cloud locations with timestamps and metadata preserved, and the overheard conversation, the quota system, the strategic targeting of affluent minority areas. The acknowledgement that professional types were easier to justify in reports. Her law degree from the University of Minnesota, her years as a public defender fighting exactly this kind of institutional abuse, her 8 years on the bench presiding over constitutional challenges that had all prepared her for this moment, had sharpened her into exactly the weapon she needed to be. Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful seizure without reasonable suspicion, without probable cause, without even minimal attempt at verification, racial profiling. Targeting based solely on appearance despite contrary evidence immediately available. Infliction of emotional distress. The trauma to her children, witnesses to their mother's humiliation. And now, with the overheard conversation, a conspiracy claim, a pattern and practice violation. Evidence of systematic corruption that extended far beyond 4 agents in a parking lot. Naomi worked through the night, building the skeleton of her case while her children slept fitfully against her, their small hands occasionally reaching out to confirm she was still there. 3 days later, back in Colorado Springs, she sat in her chambers with the door locked and made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Alexander Reeves, a civil rights attorney whose reputation for destroying federal overreach was legendary. His Los Angeles office had taken on and won cases against ICE, Border Patrol, and federal agencies that thought themselves untouchable. Reeves had been expecting her call. He'd seen the videos already, watched them spread across social media and news outlets, recognized immediately what they represented. Naomi needed representation. But she also needed something else, something more important than just her individual case. Reeves told her to name it. She needed him to help her expose a systematic pattern of corruption that used minorities as quota padding. She had overheard agents discussing their strategy in detail during her transport to the facility. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. Then Reeves asked her to tell him everything. The second call was to Rachel Kensington, Chief Judge of the Colorado 4th Judicial District, Naomi's direct superior and a mentor who'd supported her appointment to the bench 8 years earlier. Rachel had been trying to reach her since the videos went viral. Her voice carried disbelief and fury in equal measure. Naomi's request was procedural, necessary, grounded in judicial ethics. She needed to recuse herself from all ICE-related cases and any case involving these specific agents. Conflict of interest, she was about to file the lawsuit of the decade, and she needed the judiciary to remain above reproach. Rachel's response was immediate. Done. Consider it filed immediately. Then Rachel asked what Naomi needed, how she could help. Naomi's answer was simple. Support her through this. It was going to get ugly. The federal government would argue that a sitting judge filing suit created complications, jurisdictional issues, separation of powers concerns. They'd try every trick to discredit or silence her. Rachel's voice hardened with resolve. Let them try. What they did to Naomi, to a colleague, to a judge, to a mother, she would support her all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. As the evidence mounted and the legal machinery began to turn, one question emerged that would determine everything. Should federal agents face criminal charges, not just civil penalties, for systematic civil rights violations? The answer would decide whether this case would truly change the system or simply cost the government money. That distinction mattered to families across the country watching and wondering if justice could actually reach those who operated behind federal badges. 4 weeks after the incident, the lawsuit filed in United States District Court for the District of Colorado named the United States government, the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and agents Hollis, Brennan, Torres, and Webb individually. The charges were devastating in their simplicity. Unlawful detention, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, racial profiling, infliction of emotional distress, denial of due process, conspiracy to violate civil rights. The evidence was compiled with surgical precision. 7 bystander videos from different angles showing the entire parking lot incident in real time. The store manager's witness statement describing the children's trauma in heartbreaking detail. Naomi's own credentials: 8 years on the bench, 15 years practicing law, University of Minnesota Law School, honors graduate, impeccable judicial record stretching back 2 decades. Psychological evaluations of Maya and Elijah documenting severe anxiety, sleep disturbances, fear of uniformed authorities, nightmares where their mother disappeared and never returned, trust fractured at ages 10 and 7. And buried in Naomi's deposition, waiting for the strategic moment, the quota conversation, word for word. The systematic targeting of affluent minority areas, the admission that professional types were easier to justify in reports. The government's response came within 48 hours. $150,000. Confidentiality agreement attached. Sign here. Go away quietly. Let them bury this beneath bureaucratic paperwork and sealed settlements that protected institutional corruption. Naomi's response was delivered by Reeves in a press conference on the courthouse steps with media assembled, cameras rolling, the public watching. Judge James declined the settlement offer in its entirety. She sought a public trial to expose the systematic violations that led to her unlawful detention and to prevent future abuses of federal authority against all citizens, regardless of their position or credentials. The offer increased. $500,000. Still with the confidentiality clause. Still demanding silence, still attempting to buy her complicity in covering up what they'd done. Naomi rejected it without hesitation, without a moment's consideration. They could keep their money? She wanted accountability, transparency, a public record that would prevent them from doing this to someone else's child, someone else's mother, someone else's family who didn't have judicial authority or legal expertise to fight back. Justice delayed but not denied. Depositions scheduled in conference rooms where federal attorneys realized too late that they were facing someone who knew their procedures better than they did. Document requests filed with surgical precision, targeting exactly the records that would reveal the truth they'd tried to bury. And then Naomi authorized Reeves to reveal the overheard conversation in her sworn testimony, backed by the meticulous notes she'd recorded the night of her release, time-stamped and witnessed by Patricia, preserved with the kind of evidentiary care that only someone who'd spent 23 years in courtrooms would understand. The defense team's reaction was immediate and desperate. Emergency motions filed. Attempts to suppress the testimony, arguments about hearsay and lack of corroboration, procedural objections that might have worked against someone less credible. But Naomi's credibility was unimpeachable. Sitting judge. No criminal record, 23 years of distinguished legal service. Consistent testimony, corroborated timeline. Expert witness on credibility assessment. She literally judged witness testimony for a living, evaluated truthfulness and reliability as a core function of her professional existence. The case expanded beyond individual violations into something larger, more dangerous to the system that had created them. Reeves filed additional discovery requests targeting ICE's internal performance metrics for the Denver-Boulder corridor. Email records. Supervision reports. Detention statistics broken down by neighborhood demographics and professional status. Patterns emerged that validated everything Naomi had overheard in that SUV, patterns that revealed a strategy more insidious than simple racial profiling. Affluent minority neighborhoods targeted at rates 4 times higher than poor minority areas. Professional minorities, doctors, lawyers, business owners detained at rates disproportionate to their representation in the community. Detention quotas explicitly tied to agent performance reviews. Bonuses linked to numbers rather than legitimate enforcement. Internal emails discussing optics and justifiable detentions, bureaucratic euphemisms for systematic racism dressed up as policy. They'd been systematically targeting successful minorities because it looked better in reports, because professional credentials made the detention seem more legitimate, because affluent areas generated less public outcry than poor neighborhoods where residents lacked resources to fight back. It was profiling elevated to strategic policy, institutionalized and incentivized. Naomi spent her evenings preparing for trial while balancing judicial duties and motherhood. She'd return to the bench after recusing herself from relevant cases, determined not to let this derail her service to the community. Maya still woke with nightmares, her small voice calling out in the darkness. Elijah asked repeatedly if those men would come back, if they would take his mother again. She enrolled them in specialized trauma therapy, sat through sessions where they drew pictures of that day, stick figures with handcuffs, crying faces, SUVs that dominated the page like monsters looming over tiny helpless people. When a young law student named Keisha Washington reached out after reading about the case, first-generation college student from South Chicago who saw herself in Naomi's story, Naomi took her under her wing without hesitation. Taught her how to build unassailable legal arguments from fragments of evidence. How to maintain judicial composure under pressure and hostile questioning. How to channel righteous anger into methodical precision that destroyed opponents through preparation rather than passion. Support rallied from unexpected quarters. Community activists organized courthouse vigils for the trial date. Fellow judges filed amicus briefs supporting her case, breaking the usual judicial silence to stand with one of their own. The National Bar Association, the National Association of Women Judges, and the American Civil Liberties Union all offered resources, expert witnesses, research assistance, media coordination. Local coverage exploded into national attention. The case that had started in a grocery store parking lot was becoming a referendum on federal authority and racial profiling, on the limits of qualified immunity, on whether badges granted immunity from constitutional constraints. The government made one final settlement offer, $2,300,000. No confidentiality requirement this time, no gag order, just money offered in hopes that she would take it and walk away. Naomi considered it for 5 minutes before declining with the same judicial finality she brought to overruling frivolous motions. This wasn't about money. This was about ensuring they couldn't do this to anyone else. This was about exposing corruption that treated American citizens as quota padding, that valued statistics over rights, that assumed credentials didn't matter when skin color provided easier assumptions. Trial preparation consumed her final weeks. Mock cross-examinations with Reeves's team, practicing responses to every possible attack. Exhibit organization, each piece of evidence cataloged and cross-referenced. Witness coordination, ensuring everyone understood their role in the larger narrative. Reeves prepared her for the defense's inevitable attacks. They'd question her memory of the overheard conversation, challenge her emotional state and claim it compromised her recollection, argue qualified immunity protected agents making good faith mistakes, suggest that a sitting judge filing suit was itself improper and created conflicts that should dismiss the case. Naomi prepared differently. She reviewed her children's therapy notes until she'd memorized every heartbreaking detail, every developmental setback caused by watching their mother dragged away in handcuffs. Watched the bystander videos until she could recite every word she'd spoken in that parking lot, every assertion of her rights that had been ignored. Studied Fourth Amendment case law until she could cite precedents in her sleep, until the constitutional violations were so clear that no reasonable person could deny them. She drew on Minnesota roots, generations of Scandinavian and African American community organizing, the memory of her grandmother who'd marched in Minneapolis in the 1960s, the legacy of resistance against institutional prejudice that ran deep in her family like bedrock under soil. This case was bigger than her humiliation in a parking lot. It was about Maya and Elijah learning that injustice had consequences, that power when abused could be challenged, that their mother's credentials and dignity mattered enough to fight for even when the fight seemed impossible. The night before trial, Naomi stood in her Colorado Springs home looking out at Pikes Peak silhouetted against the evening sky. Somewhere in this city, Hollis and Brennan and Torres and Webb were preparing their own testimony, rehearsing justifications for what they'd done. Somewhere, federal attorneys were rehearsing arguments about good faith mistakes and qualified immunity, about the difficult job of immigration enforcement in complex circumstances. Tomorrow she would walk into that courthouse not as the woman they'd dismissed in a parking lot, but as the judge they'd catastrophically underestimated. She turned from the window, opened her trial binder one final time, and reviewed her testimony notes with the same methodical precision she brought to every ruling from the bench. She was ready. The United States District Court for the District of Colorado stood against a November morning sky 8 months after the parking lot incident, its modern glass and steel facade reflecting clouds that threatened early snow. Naomi entered through a separate entrance, professional courtesy for a state judge entering federal court dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, her judicial credentials in her briefcase not as evidence but as reminder of exactly who she was. Behind her, Maya and Elijah walked with their grandmother Grace, who'd flown in from Minneapolis. The children dressed carefully for a day that would define their understanding of justice for the rest of their lives. The courtroom was packed. Activists wearing shirts reading Judge James and End Racial Profiling. Attorneys from civil rights organizations nationwide. Media filling every available seat in the press section, cameras ready to capture history being made. At the defense table, Hollis, Brennan, Torres and Webb sat in uncomfortable suits that didn't quite fit, flanked by federal attorneys whose expressions carried the weight of a case they'd lost before opening statements began. Judge Michael Brenner took the bench at 9 a.m. sharp, a Clinton appointee with a reputation for no-nonsense fairness who'd built his career on holding government accountable. The jury of 9 women and 3 men, diverse in age and race and background, filed in with carefully neutral faces that would soon reveal their verdict. Reeves's opening statement was surgical in its precision. He presented synchronized footage from 7 different angles, body cameras, multiple bystander phones, the store's security system showing the entire parking lot incident in real time from every possible perspective. The jury watched Naomi load groceries with her children. Watched 4 agents converge in tactical formation as if approaching an armed suspect. Watched her present identification that was dismissed without even a phone call for verification. Watched her children's terror as handcuffs clicked shut around their mother's wrists. Watched her voice remain steady while asserting her rights, citing her judicial position, identifying herself repeatedly while being dragged away from her crying children. The jury watched a sitting judge treated like a criminal in front of her babies. Reeves concluded with devastating simplicity. They hadn't just detained a citizen. They detained a sitting judge for 5 hours and 17 minutes without once attempting to verify who she was. Why? Because they'd already decided, based solely on the color of her skin, that her credentials couldn't possibly be real. The defense argued good faith throughout their opening. Routine compliance sweep conducted according to procedure. No racial motivation, just unfortunate misunderstanding quickly corrected upon proper verification. Difficult job made more difficult by people claiming credentials they didn't possess. Agent Hollis testified first on day 2, his narrative polished by weeks of federal coaching. Intelligence about undocumented individuals in affluent areas using false credentials. Behavioral indicators that justified their approach. Standard protocol followed to the letter. Reeves destroyed him methodically on cross-examination, revealing each lie through Hollis's own words and the evidence that contradicted them. What specific behavioral indicators justified detaining Judge James? Hollis hesitated, searching for language that might sound credible. General demeanor suggested. Judge James was loading groceries with her children. Is that suspicious behavior requiring detention? The jury leaned forward, engaged now. Reeves pressed without mercy. In the context of our intelligence, what intelligence? Produce it. The defense couldn't. No specific intelligence. No actionable tip. Nothing beyond Hollis's assertion that a black woman in casual clothes couldn't possibly be a district court judge, that her presence in an affluent neighborhood required investigation regardless of any actual evidence of wrongdoing. Reeves showed Exhibit 17 security camera footage from the store showing Hollis looking directly into Naomi's vehicle, looking at a briefcase with the official seal of the Colorado State Judiciary clearly visible. The jury watched him see it and ignore it, choosing detention over the 90 seconds a verification call would have required. Naomi's testimony came on day 4. She detailed her career from Minneapolis roots through law school discrimination and public defender battles and the near impossible path to the bench for a black woman. Described that Thursday afternoon, The routine errand after court adjourned early, the sudden confrontation, her children's fear, the handcuffs biting her wrists while she recited credentials and rights and citizenship, all dismissed because 3 words, black woman, casual, had overridden evidence and reason. Then she revealed the overheard conversation word for word, exactly as she documented it. Brennan discussing targets and quotas, Hollis acknowledging the strategy of pushing affluent minority areas because numbers looked more legitimate, because professional types were easier to justify in reports. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Every juror sat motionless, absorbing the implications of what they'd just heard. Reeves entered her contemporaneous notes into evidence pages written the night of her release, time-stamped, witnessed by Patricia. Methodically documented with the kind of detail only a sitting judge would know to preserve. The defense objected frantically. Hearsay without corroboration, unreliable memory, bias from emotional trauma. But Judge Brenner overruled each objection with the same reasoning. Naomi James wasn't just any witness. She was a sitting judge whose profession demanded assessing witness credibility, whose training emphasized accurate observation and documentation, whose testimony carried extraordinary weight under the law. The case transformed in that moment from individual violation into systematic exposure. Days of evidence followed. Discovery documents the defense had fought desperately to suppress. Internal ICE emails discussing strategic demographic targeting to improve detention justification metrics. Supervision reports praising effective affluent corridor enforcement. Statistical analysis showing detention rates in professional minority neighborhoods 4 times higher than comparable white areas. The quota system wasn't speculation or paranoia. It was documented policy hiding behind bureaucratic euphemisms. Expert witnesses testified about the damage done. Child psychologist Dr. Marcus Williams described Maya and Elijah's trauma in clinical terms that made several jurors wipe their eyes: severe anxiety, night terrors, separation anxiety so profound they couldn't let their mother out of sight, fear of uniformed authorities that would follow them into adulthood. He showed the jury drawings the children had made their mother in handcuffs, stick figures crying, massive SUVs looming like monsters over tiny helpless people. Constitutional law expert Professor Diana Whitlock detailed the Fourth Amendment violations with academic precision. No reasonable suspicion. No probable cause. Credentials explicitly stated and deliberately ignored. Detention extended 5 hours beyond any possible justification. And critically, Judge James's judicial position proved they had immediate simple means of verification they chose not to use. 1 phone call. 90 seconds. Instead they chose 5 hours of detention. That wasn't procedure. That was punishment. The defense's qualified immunity argument collapsed under examination. They couldn't claim good faith when Naomi had clearly stated her objections, her identification, her citation of specific constitutional protections all captured on body cameras. They'd been told explicitly that their actions were unconstitutional. They proceeded anyway because they couldn't conceive that she was telling the truth. Closing arguments spanned an entire day. The defense urged understanding of the difficult job federal agents faced, the complexity of immigration enforcement, the good faith efforts that sometimes resulted in unfortunate mistakes. Reeves countered with truth so simple it needed no embellishment. Naomi James presented her judicial credentials, her identification number, her position, her authority. She gave them every tool they needed to verify her identity in seconds. They detained her anyway. They handcuffed her in front of her children. They held her for 5 hours and 17 minutes. Why? Because they saw a black woman and couldn't imagine she was telling the truth. And then we discover they were systematically targeting professional minorities to pad their statistics, to make their quota numbers look legitimate. This isn't a mistake. This is policy. This is corruption. And it stops here. The jury deliberated for 6 days while Naomi maintained normal routines with determined normalcy. Mornings with her children, reading to them and answering their questions about the trial with age-appropriate honesty. Afternoons in chambers attending to judicial duties because she refused to let this case define her entire existence. Evenings with her mother, drawing strength from Minnesota roots and civil rights legacy that stretched back generations. On the 6th day, word came. Verdict reached. The courtroom filled again with everyone who'd followed every moment, who understood they were watching precedent being made. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table with hands folded and breathing steady while Maya and Elijah remained with Grace in a separate room, shielded from whatever came next. Judge Brenner read the verdict form with judicial precision. On the charge of unlawful detention, the jury found in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of Fourth Amendment violations, in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of racial profiling, in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of infliction of emotional distress, in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, in favor of the plaintiff. Unanimous on all counts. The damages phase took another day of testimony about harm done and accountability owed. Compensatory damages for Naomi's trauma, for her children's psychological harm that would follow them for years, for violations of constitutional rights that were supposed to be inviolable. Punitive damages against the individual agents who'd chosen this path. Punitive damages against the government agency that had fostered a systematic strategy of targeting professional minorities for quota padding. The final award came down like a gavel strike. $18,400,000. The courtroom erupted despite Brenner's gavel. Activists shouting victory, media rushing for exits to file breaking news. At the defense table, the agents sat frozen with faces gone ashen, their careers and futures destroyed by their own choices recorded on their own cameras. Naomi remained still and composed, but her eyes reflected something beyond vindication. Accountability measured not in money but in public record that couldn't be sealed, in precedent that would protect others, in justice served through method rather than spectacle. Outside the courthouse, she made a brief statement to assembled media with her children and mother flanking her. This was never about compensation. It was about exposing corruption that treats American citizens, particularly successful minority citizens, as quota opportunities rather than people with rights. The verdict sends a clear message that such behavior has severe consequences regardless of the badge or agency involved. A reporter shouted a question about what happens now. Naomi looked down at Maya and Elijah, then back at the cameras capturing this moment for history. Now we make sure this never happens to another family. The consequences rippled outward with the inevitability of truth finally told. Hollis, Brennan, Torres, and Webb terminated immediately. Their law enforcement careers ended permanently. Federal prosecutors launched criminal investigations into the quota system. The ICE Denver field office underwent complete restructuring. Congressional hearings convened with the director of ICE called to testify before the House Judiciary Committee about systematic targeting of affluent minority professionals. Policy changes followed with the weight of precedent behind them. Mandatory credential verification procedures before any detention. Independent oversight of detention decisions. Bias training with actual consequences for failure. Statistical monitoring of detention demographics to identify patterns. Whistleblower protections for agents reporting quota pressure. But Naomi wasn't done. She used part of the settlement to establish something unprecedented: the James Justice Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused specifically on civil rights violations by federal agencies. Unlike typical civil rights firms, the foundation operated with surgical precision and unlimited resources. She recruited attorneys who'd faced their own discrimination, people who understood systemic abuse from personal experience rather than academic study. Hired investigators who knew exactly which neighborhoods were targeted and why. Created a rapid response team that could mobilize within hours when similar incidents occurred anywhere in the country. The foundation's first major case came 6 months after her verdict. A Latina doctor detained at Houston Intercontinental Airport despite having her medical credentials and passport prominently displayed. Held for 7 hours. Missed a critical surgery she was scheduled to perform, a surgery that couldn't be rescheduled, that cost a patient precious time and cancer treatment. The James Justice Foundation took her case without charging a single dollar. Won $12,700,000. 3 agents fired. Policy changes at Houston ICE. More cases followed in rapid succession. An Asian American technology executive detained at a Border Patrol checkpoint in Arizona despite having corporate identification and security clearances. A black college professor stopped in New Mexico while driving to an academic conference, held for 6 hours in a detention facility while his presentation time passed. Each time, the foundation mobilized with military efficiency, evidence preservation, immediate legal action, media coordination, expert witnesses ready to testify. Each time, they won. Naomi also began teaching while maintaining her judgeship, refusing to give up the bench that represented her life's work. She accepted an adjunct professorship at the University of Colorado Law School, teaching a seminar titled Constitutional Rights in Practice, When the System Fails. The class became legendary within a single semester. It filled immediately with 200 student waiting lists. Naomi taught them not just constitutional theory but practical reality: how to document violations in real time, how to stay composed when authority figures dismissed their credentials, how to build unassailable cases from fragments of injustice. She brought in guest speakers who'd lived these battles. Attorneys who'd won civil rights cases against impossible odds, judges who'd presided over them. Victims who'd survived violations and lived to seek accountability. Former ICE agents who'd blown the whistle on quota systems and paid career prices for their integrity. Her message every semester was the same. The law is only as strong as people's willingness to enforce it. Constitutional rights mean nothing if we're not prepared to fight for them. And fight we must with evidence, precision, and absolute refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Maya and Elijah grew up surrounded by this work, watching their mother transform trauma into purpose. Therapy helped. Time helped. But what helped most was seeing violation become vindication, watching their mother build something lasting from that terrible Thursday afternoon. By ages 17 and 14, they could articulate exactly what had happened to them and why it mattered beyond their family. Maya wrote her college essay about resilience, about watching her mother fight back against a system designed to silence her. Elijah researched famous civil rights cases for his history project and discovered his mother's case was already in textbooks, already being studied by law students across the country. Years accumulated with victories that built on each other. The foundation won case after case, each verdict another brick in accountability's wall. Naomi's judicial record remained impeccable, known for fairness and precision and zero tolerance for civil rights violations in her courtroom. The King Soopers on Boulder Highway installed a memorial plaque near the entrance. In this parking lot on April 7, 2024, an injustice occurred that sparked accountability. May all who enter remember dignity, credentials, and constitutional rights belong to everyone. Below it, a QR code linked to the foundation's resources. The parking lot where a judge was detained became a landmark, a teaching tool, a reminder that ordinary spaces could become extraordinary battlegrounds for justice. 10 years after that Thursday afternoon, a young woman named Alexis Johnson visited Naomi's chambers. Second-year law student at CU. Detained 3 years earlier by Border Patrol near Pueblo. Remembered Naomi's case, documented everything, called the foundation. Won $400,000. 2 agents fired. Now pursuing a civil rights law career inspired by what she'd witnessed. Alexis revealed what Naomi had suspected but couldn't fully comprehend. There were dozens of them now. Hundreds. People inspired by her case, mentored by her teaching, empowered by her example. Going into civil rights law, becoming judges, running for office, teaching, organizing. An army built from one parking lot confrontation. That evening at home, Maya discussed her college essay about resilience. Elijah mentioned his mother's case appearing in textbooks. Naomi asked them what they wanted people to know about that day. Maya answered without hesitation. That it happened. That it was wrong. And that their mother made sure it meant something. Elijah added his own truth. That sometimes people in power mess with someone who has the power to destroy them. Naomi reflected on the real cost of that Thursday afternoon. 4 agents' careers ended. $18,400,000 paid. Policy reforms across multiple agencies. Congressional hearings and criminal investigations. But the permanent cost, the cost that mattered most, was the message sent to every federal agent, every system, every authority that assumed credentials didn't matter when skin color provided easier assumptions. They'd underestimated the wrong woman. They'd traumatized her children. They'd handed a sitting judge evidence of systematic corruption, and she'd made sure the entire country knew the consequences. Tomorrow would bring another day on the bench, another case to decide, another opportunity to ensure justice exceeded theory. The work was never finished. The fight never ended, but the line held firm. And that was enough. If you liked this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and let's keep building this community together. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what stood out to you most. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and I'll see you in the next one.